Welcome to This Club Sucks, grief support for parents after the lasagnas are long gone. I am your host, Melissa Monroe, here with my co-host, Alexandria Seamock. Each week we record our child loss chat on Twitter Spaces, where we explore topics around grief and trauma. Whether you are a bereaved parent, want to support bereaved parents, or exploring other sources of grief, we'll be here holding space after the lasagnas are long gone.
Oh, this club sucks.
Welcome to Child Loss Chat. I'm Melissa Monroe, and my co-host Alexandria, aka Dr. A, is here, and we are thrilled to have our guest Liberty Worth today.
Thank you.
Liberty is a quilt designer and artist, and made my memory quilt from my Alice's clothes, and I couldn't be happier to have her today. These spaces will be recorded for my upcoming podcast, This Club Sucks, support for grief parents after the lasagnas are long gone. Once I have a few of them recorded, they will be put up wherever you can hear podcasts. Today, we're going to talk about meaningful memorial gifts. And again, if you aren't speaking now, go ahead and mute your mic until it's your time to speak. It just reduces the background noise for everyone. So I sent in a bereaved parent group that I belong to on Facebook, I posted something and asked people to send in some of the gifts or services or actions that they benefited from after their child died. And there were some really beautiful things. And Dr. A is putting some of those things up in the nest for us as we speak. I'll start with myself. Among the most meaningful that I've received was the quilt from Alice's Clothes that our guest today, Liberty, made, which is just exquisite. And I think Dr. A has added it to the nest there at the top. You can see the beautiful butterfly. Butterflies are a symbol that remind us of Alice, and that quilt is just absolutely stunning. Dr. A has also included some images of Liberty's other memorial quilts, which are more in her signature style. Other gifts, there were lots of mentions of paintings or portraits. I received a painting that was based on an iconic picture of Alice on the 4th of July that was done by an artist named Tashina Suzuki, which is just incredible. Tashina mostly does more spiritually based photos, but she does, or paintings rather, she's a painter. But she also does memorial pieces, and that, I'm pretty sure Dr. A put that up there also, is just a stunning work that meant a lot to me. Another gift, and this was a really great idea, David Austin Roses, and I will find a link. David Austin Roses has many, many, many bare root rose bushes with thousands of names. There is a rose bush entitled Miss Alice. And I had 2 different sets of friends that sent me Miss Alice rose bushes. I really love that idea because it's something I can care for every day. That brings beautiful blooms. It makes me happy. It makes anyone that looks at them happy. And it's something we can continually care for, because I think most parents who have lost a child, that instinct to care for your child doesn't die when your child dies. It goes nowhere. You still have it, but you have nowhere to direct it. And so some of these gifts that we are going to talk about today, I think the real beauty of them is it gives you something to tend to that reminds you of your child. and also brings beauty. This is the same with the quilt. Like I can care for myself in the quilt. I get to tell people the story of the quilt, and all of these things help to keep the memory alive and her importance alive, and it's something I can care for. I have to wash the quilt. I have to make sure the dog doesn't sleep on it, although that's a losing battle most of the time. But I think the real beauty in most of the gifts I'll be discussing is it's something that you can continue to care for, and a permanent reminder of your child. I know that other parents have received certain plants that bloom during the month of their children's dates, either their birthday or their death anniversary. And they all report that really having something bloom during those difficult dates really is a ray of sunshine in a really difficult time. So that's also a wonderful idea. What those plants would be obviously would depend on the month and what part of the world you're in and all of that. Um, Other things that were mentioned were framed artwork that the child had made, or important photos, all of that, having them framed. I mean, I think all of us are parents or step parents or like aunts or uncles, most of us in this chat. And even if you're not, how many photos do you have sitting around the house? Do you think, I'm going to get that in a frame? And 10 years later, it is still not in a frame. My house is full. I literally have a tub in my hallway that's waiting to become a photo wall, but it never seems to win the the competition for my time. I'm going to have to hire it out. That's what I'm going to do. But taking some of that work and framing it for someone just takes, it won't take you long, but it will mean so much to the recipient. Another idea that several people talked about were wind chimes that were engraved with the name and dates of the departed, which is a beautiful idea. And anytime there's a little wind, you hear those chimes, which is a really soothing sound, and the parent will know the meaning behind that. It's just a beautiful idea. Several other people said people had named stars after their child through the International Star Registry, which is a great idea and something I'm probably going to do myself for from Alice, and probably my other daughter Grace as well, so she doesn't feel left out. Which reminds me, other brilliant friends, when I received the Miss Alice rose bushes, didn't want Grace, who was 4 at the time, to feel left out, and there is a Grace rose bush also, and so they sent Grace rose bushes. So my Miss Alice bushes and my Grace rose bushes are all together. Someone else said that the funeral home, this is beautiful, the funeral home made a plaster cast of their child's hand, and then their in-laws had it recast in bronze, so they always have their child's hand nearby. That one just really chokes me up. That was really I know that will probably seem morbid to some people, but every bereaved parent I know, when they heard that, wishes that their funeral director had done that for them. It's just a really beautiful idea. Um, then there were many people that talked about dedications, paving stones at Disneyland dedicated to their child, or a bookshelf at the Dr. Seuss Museum, or a paving stone at some important place to that family in the community. So there were many dedications, and dedications of trees and tree plantings, and all of that are the I can't talk today. All of those are really beautiful ideas. And again, it lives on. It has a life of its own. It's a place that you can go and other people can go and remember your child. Because, as I've said many times before, the fear that your child will be forgotten, or that they won't have the impact they could have on the world, is really all consuming for lost parents. And so those dedications really are meaningful. In the same vein, donations to charity. So many of my friends and family have donated to a charity that I support, Southern California Counseling Center, where I received therapy after Alice died. I did EMDR therapy there, which was life changing to me. It's my my memoir. My upcoming memoir is basically about my journey through that and how impactful it was. Eventually, there were so many donations to that organization through Alice's name that when they were able to build a second location in the Watts community, which is tragically underserved, and so amazing that they were able to build a center there. They dedicated one of the rooms to Alice, which is, you know, one of the most beautiful things that has ever happened to our family. Oh, another great idea that I heard about, and this is great if there are other children, there are surviving siblings, or if a child lost a parent. Build a bear, let you take voice recordings and put them in the bear. Did you guys know this? I had no idea. This must have happened after Alice passed, because this would have been a really great thing for Grace had I known about it. But essentially, you could take a recording of Alice's voice, put it in a little voice box inside the bear, and then it's a way for the child or adult to still hear the voice of your child. And most people who have received that as a gift said it was really especially appreciated by their children, many of whom weren't really old enough to understand what happened, and whose connection to their sibling who is departed and their relationship to their own grief is going to necessarily change through the years. So I thought that was a great idea. There was another idea of creating a puzzle from either a photo of the child or artwork that the child had made. It's a beautiful idea. And then acts of service. This first one that I'm going to talk about in acts of service is really beautiful. One mother said that when her child, after her child died on the first anniversary of her child's death, and on the first birthday that they had to celebrate after their child died, they had a friend that came over early in the morning and just sat on their porch with breakfast and coffee. She didn't want to wake them up. She just was there when they woke up, so that they knew they weren't going to be alone that day, and that she was there if they needed her. And if they wanted to be alone, she left the food and the coffee, and therefore she could still take care of them. She was just letting them know, I'm here if you need me. I've brought you breakfast. You don't have to worry about that. And mostly that I understand the impact of this day, and this is what I knew to do. I thought that was beautiful. So those are some of the ideas that people have shared with me. We will open it up to discussion, and people can talk about ideas that they have or gifts that they have received that were meaningful to them. But first, I want to ask Liberty a couple of questions.
Hi.
So, will you tell us about the journey that brought you to making your very first memory quilt? And if you have a chance, everyone look up at the top in the nest or in my Twitter feed. Liberty's work is breathtaking, and she's famous. She's in museums and stuff. She's very fancy and very talented.
I think that makes me sound a little more famous than I am.
Take it.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, thanks for letting me be here in this space. It's a precious space, and so I honor that. My journey. I've always been I've always been someone who is, I think, who is okay with walking through valleys with people. But it's not that I set out to do this necessarily. I was learning. I was a textile designer for years. I learned how to quilt, and as I learned how to quilt, I started just taking commissions, and people would say, well, like, maybe you can, make this for me. And so I would do commissions. But I had my own private grief journey, which is separate. It's different than it is. It's not the death of a child, but I was a foster parent who was on the full path to adoption and then ended up not being able to keep my child after having him over a year. And so I went through my own type of grief, and that made me, I think, especially sensitive to the way that, number one, textiles seem to hold memory. And number two, that having something tangible that you can hold and, for me, initially construct is a part of healing. And so those two things came together. So I worked out my own healing through my art and through making things and sewing things. And I came back to a place where my grief was no longer, like suffocating. And instead it was something that just was in the room with me. So I was like, this was really healing for me, and so in that space, I really, I when I was approached by someone because they knew my story of grief, and they also knew that I did commissions. And so it came together. Initially, someone I never knew. It wasn't a very, it was like a grandfather who had passed a number of years earlier, and they had been looking for someone. And I was like, sure, I'll do this for you. But the experience was actually really great. And I thought, wow, I even process grief for people I don't know as I'm doing this. That was kind of an interesting observation I made. But I also felt like it was again cathartic for me. And I saw that what I was offering to that first family was they brought me a box of stuff that was like sitting in their attic and very, very heavy, right? Like so much heavier than the actual weight of it. And they brought that to me. And instead, a couple months later, I came back with something they could wrap themselves up in. Right. So that felt like, oh, okay, there's some value in this. I actually didn't know a lot about memorial quilts. I'm not in like the traditional quilt world. My stuff's pretty modern. But then soon after that, a classmate of my son lost a parent who I knew and who I loved. And I partnered with that family, in making something. And from there, it became something that I thought, oh, I think this is one of the reasons why I'm here, and why maybe this is why, not why I went through my journey and my grief, but how I can use my grief, right? And to be constructive and to do beauty in the world. So, yeah, and since it's a lot of word of mouth that goes around. I don't really advertise. I have a website, but it's really a word of mouth thing that happens because I think people, or they're starting to find me online. That's happening more. But the reality is just that what I'm wanting to do is to come alongside people and carry this thing that I have this specific ability and this skill to carry this one object from one place to another. And that's what I can offer. Like I know I'm not a therapist. I know I'm not, there's all the things I know I'm not, and I cannot do all those things. But what I do know is that I have this one skill that I do well. And it has become a joy to me to do it for people.
That's so beautiful. I love what you said about taking just a box of heaviness that's just sitting there and transforming it into something that one can wrap themselves up in. That's beautiful. And that's absolutely how I felt. I couldn't get rid of the clothes. I knew that. I knew that I wanted them to be a quilt one day, but it took me a long time, as you know, Liberty, and Beth's on here. Beth knows about this, as does Mo. Hey, Mo. It took me a long time to be ready to have those clothes deconstructed, or to have really any kind of idea of what I wanted them to become. And then the longer I knew Liberty, the more it was clear what was supposed to happen to those clothes. Liberty taught Grace sewing for a couple of years, and it just, and I saw her work and was just completely blown away. Liberty's quilting is not your normal quilting. It truly is breathtaking and true art. But I love what you said, Liberty, about because it's heaviness. Like, you don't know, you can't get rid of it because it reminds you of your child. And the clothes are really hard. When I talk to bereaved parents and they talk about what they're struggling with, clothes always comes up. I don't know what to do with these clothes. I can't get rid of them. They're just sitting there. We have to move. I don't know what to do. I can't get rid of them. But the clothes are really difficult for the bereaved. And so this is just really that you're able to transform them from heaviness into a thing of beauty that they can actually use and touch daily. Because if they're in a box, you're not touching them daily. You're just hanging on to them because you don't know what else to do. So it's just a really beautiful service that you offer, and you do it. You do it so beautifully, it makes me cry. I cry when I see even the pieces that you do for other people because I know what it means to them. I also love what you said about it was a way for you to transform your own grief, which is so important. And also, I think a really good example of grief has to be moved through. It can feel paralyzing, but succumbing to that paralysis it rarely helps. And in fact, in my own observation, makes it much worse. It really is something that we have to move through, and transforming things that can be kind of difficult into something beautiful. There's just really no more. There's no more beautiful way to do that. And so that is another beautiful thing about your work, Liberty, is the inner work that it provides you and the recipient and the memory of the departed. So bravo.
Thank you.
You want to tell us a little bit about how you developed your if you guys look up in the nest, you'll see some of her work, which you'll immediately see is not your usual quilt. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about how you developed your style and the noisy flowers? Her noisy flowers series is mind-boggling. My mom, who quilts, just cannot even fathom how Liberty does it. Do you want to talk to us about how you developed sort of your style and the noisy flowers series?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, right? Because as an artist, you can go years and years and years of making art and not know your voice. And so I'm also an art teacher at a high school these days. And I'm always telling my kids, like, you can't find your voice immediately. Like, this is something that takes years to get to. And so I was making things for many years. But what's funny now is if I look back, my first sketchbooks have those shapes in them. So they were there all along. I didn't know how to hear them. And gradually what happened was I got to a place where I was really stuck creatively. It was not, I mean, it was right around when I was doing a lot of memorial quilts, to be honest. And that was the only thing I was making because I was really discouraged creatively in this, because my work is divided between like these memorial quilts and then also just my personal artwork. Fortunately, these days, actually, I'm getting a lot of people who want my work with their items, which is a treasure to me. It's like even more joy as I'm creating this than ever. But that's not how they initially started, pretty separate. And the noisy flower, to be really honest, just came like, I have 3 children, and the 3 I have almost never are all happy. So um, there's
Ain't that the truth?
there's very few moments where all 3 are happy. And there was a moment we were on a trip, and we were swimming together, and all 3 had joy. And I just, given our journey and what we had been through, and just, I am so appreciative of those moments. And that moment stuck with me. I took a picture. They were in the pool and the water was swirling around them. And I came home and I had only been doing memorial quilts because those are the ones that I still had motivation to do, but my own work I had just given up on for a while. And I thought, could I somehow capture that moment of joy and of beauty and like this? It was healing, right? It was a healing energy that I was feeling. Could I capture that in fabric? Which I'm actually, to be really honest, fabric does not like to do what I'm telling it to do. Like it doesn't want to bend in curves and lay flat. And so this has been a journey of, I think I've been making them now for like 5 years, and it has different permutations, and I'm always trying to push it in different directions. But this has become my signature style, mostly because it's the language that my heart speaks. Right. And so what has been beautiful really since it's probably only been since last fall that some of my bereaved customers are coming to me going, I actually really like your work that you do. Normally, can you take my items and do that from it? And I am like, absolutely. There's like, I could do those forever. I think also what's nice is that they become a wall piece that you can touch. And so, the reality is the price point's a little bit more manageable for some people, even just to get a little tiny thing. So that's another blessing for people. But it's also giftable, like more than this giant quilt. But I I had a family this year that liked the whole thing so much that they commissioned 20 of these small wall art pieces, and they
Damn,
ended.
girl.
I know, and they were so beautiful. These people had an art show as a family with with a band and a catering thing, like just to celebrate as their celebration of life. A couple months out was to reveal this body of artwork, and it was really a beautiful thing to be. And they had me come, like I was a part of that family in that moment, which was incredibly beautiful. And I just don't take lightly what people are entrusting me with. I do honor that. I'm very sensitive, very, I'm like, I'm not super woo woo, but there's no denying that there's some kind of energy with the clothes, right? Like I'll just be like, I'm in the mood for Latin jazz. And I start playing it, and I just will record it to send to the family, like a little video of like me working on it. And they'll be like, that was his music, or whatever. Those things it is not rare for those types of things to happen. And I'm not, I'm not saying I'm not like a medium or anything, but I am absolutely convinced that there's a spiritual aspect to what I'm doing, and I am comfortable sitting in that space.
That's beautiful. I know you've told me about many moments like that you've had while you've done memorial pieces, and I love it. And it means you're in the flow, you're in the universal, you're where you're supposed to be, and it's beautiful. Now I'd like to open it up to any questions people might have for Liberty about her work, or ideas that you may have for meaningful memorial gifts or beautiful things you've received. Oh, Dr. A, let's get you up here.
Hi, Liberty. When you're making the quilts or any piece of art that's memorial art, do you spend a lot of time talking to the family or looking at pictures of the person that's gone, or do you do any of that before you start?
That's a really great question. Thank you. Like I said, I know I'm not a therapist, so I'm very, very careful with not going in on someone's boundaries and not overstepping my bounds. I always have a consultation first, and sometimes someone will bring someone with them to be the speaker, like this woman who commissioned 20 pieces. She initially brought her sister, and her sister did the talking, and then as she gained trust in me, she would talk more. But I'm very, very cautious in that. And so there have been times when there's like an agent who brings the stuff, or that's a friend, and there's other times when the person themselves has approached me. But I will say that, like, we do a consultation. I generally do not go into, I don't ask specifics because I don't intend to create more grief while I'm in that space. Like, it took them so much just to walk into my space, to approach me. Like, that journey of getting to me has been so hard that I'm not like, I actually, to be really honest, I'm not a long hugger because I don't like long hugs because I feel like they're gratuitous a lot of times. And people felt like when I needed like healing, I didn't like people like always hugging to the point where like it was like they were trying to make me cry, and I don't. So I'm a little weird about that. I don't actually even, I don't hug my customers because unless, if at the end, often they'll feel that way and they'll feel safe enough and they'll ask me that. But I'm I'm not clinical at all, but I am very much, I keep it at a level that is warm, and they can speak as much as they want. And we often go through my work together and they show me things that they like and things that maybe they're colors that feel good to them. And I often have them come prepared with that information. Like a lot of times when you're entering in those seasons or those situations that are very raw, like having a script ahead of time is really good. And so they come in and they go, well, I like this work of yours and this work of yours, and these are the colors I'm thinking, and this is the size I want because this is how I want to use it. So they're coming in with all that information ahead of time. We've already had like an online back and forth usually, and then from there we can talk as much as they want or not. I've had people spend 20 minutes and I've had people spend an hour with me, but like I'm on the front end, especially since if I'm not initially friends, like with Melissa's different, right? But on the front end, I'm very, very reserved in myself. I'm present and I'm heart forward and I'm open, but I do not punch buttons or anything like that. I don't know if that all makes sense.
It does. I mean, thank you. That was really beautiful. I mean, I'm not a visual artist, so I really appreciate hearing that.
If anyone that's in listener mode would like to ask a question and you don't know how, there is a request mic button at the lower left side of your screen, and you can hit that, and then we can bring you up. Dr. A does all of that back channeling for me because I have trouble chewing gum and walking at the same time. Rachel.
How you're making me laugh. You're so funny.
Thanks.
Yes. I saw the quilt yesterday on your timeline, and just kudos to Liberty for creating something beautiful out of something so, so tragic. One thing that I think is really interesting, and I had this question for both of you, really. My daughter is in college and she's going to be an art history major. And one of these rare things that she found, she's very into the macabre and horror and all that stuff, the complete opposite of me. And she found that back in, I would say mid-century, 1800s, 1700s, something like that, in Poland, they would have an artist create what's called a coffin portrait. And so they would basically draw them or paint them as they were in the funeral parlor. So, I mean, they definitely look dead, and of course they had no technology really to speak of, but I thought it was such a beautiful way to, it's a little dark, to memorialize the people that we love. And I wonder, Liberty, if there's a history of creating quilts and other beautiful pieces of fabric art that, whether it's American or somewhere else, to honor the death. Does that at all go into your thought process?
Well, I was actually fortunate to get to tour. There's a really phenomenal Egyptian museum in Italy that I went to. And they have specific memorial things. So that history goes so far back. Like
it does.
It's like, way before anything that we could even comprehend. So, and textiles initially were truly like the form of wealth. And so the way you would announce your wealth or your status or anything would be textiles. So people would be buried with their textiles. So, there's all sorts of that kind of stuff. Even as I say that, I remember when a girlfriend of mine, right after I had lost my foster son, one of my quilter friends passed away, and I sew on her machine now. And so she and I together made 18 quilts for all her nieces and nephews. And I got a group of girls together and we made a quilt for her that she was buried with. So this is like I think this is sort of inherent in who we are as humans, to grab onto textiles and to draw comfort from them wherever we're going, right? Even into the beyond, right? So there's some of that. There's definitely it's a fun thing to look at, like the history of quilts in general. It's, there's the initial part of patchwork is a frugality, right? So you're reusing all these things that already have all these inherent memories and this inherent intrinsic value already. So that's already there. I think it's just part of the history. So I don't know. I mean, you just go as far back as you wanted.
Yeah. I mean, it's really amazing because when she presented this, nobody's ever heard of Polish coffin portraits, right?
Yeah.
But one of the professors at her college, she was doing a presentation about it. The whole class was, and he came over and he said, "I'm the head of Egyptian studies here, and I would love to talk to you further about that." And I was like, "Damn, okay, you go, girl." But but I loved the whole concept of quilting anyway as a bonding activity. That's something else I wondered if that makes if that's helpful for you as the person creating the art.
Well, there's a couple things that I've done with that. Well, quilting generally these days is largely done alone. Yeah. There are virtual quilting bees where you would send pieces of fabric and people do something and they gather it together. So like the one we made for my girlfriend Yolanda, we all made these blocks, we brought them back together, we stitched them together, and then we actually did a true quilting bee where we sat together and quilted it together. That's the only time in my life I've done something like that.
Okay.
But in general, it is a largely solo thing.
Yeah.
Two things that I have to say about that. One is the one family where I said it was the father of a child in my son's class. That family, once I made the quilt, it was king size, made out of all this denim and stuff, really beautiful. I actually left the mom and daughter with needles and thread for them to hand quilt whenever they wanted to.
Oh, that's nice.
And that particular family is one of my only families who's ever wanted to deconstruct the fabric themselves. They're Danish, which I think there's a practicality that's very inherent in that culture, that for them, that was very much like a moving forward thing. Mm-hmm. That's not a common thing I have. I do have one customer now who is also deconstructing herself. But it's not everyone wants to be in that place. It's really difficult. It's difficult even for me when I've never met the person. And I have to really kind of keep my listening ears open in that moment. It's probably the hardest part of the whole thing, to be honest.
Wow.
But an interesting thing, like you bring up this community aspect. So during the pandemic, I was in an artist residency that was dealing with race in America. And I had made a piece that right after George Floyd was murdered that I was like, well, this has helped me before. Can it help my cultural grief as well? Mm-hmm. And I made a piece, and then I got, and then I made another piece, and then I made another piece. And then I was like, whoa, this is weird. And so that kind of spurred into this whole body of work. And I got into this residency, and the residency was like, we need you to make this a community event. And I was like, I don't really have a spot. How do you quilt during a pandemic with other people? Like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But what I actually ended up doing was I turned it into a paper activity that people could collage. And they made these paper collages with simple black and white triangles, like the simplest of all shapes, but it's a quilting shape. Mm-hmm. And I sent it out to people. And in turn, we all talked about our grief. And it's become a class I teach now that is like processing, not necessarily, I don't lead it with grief, but processing whatever the action is at that moment or the topic, processing that through the action of manipulating these materials, specifically these triangles, because they're such a simple shape that a 5-year-old can do it too. And you create symbols and things like that. And what's interesting is that for all of my participants, there's been dozens of them now, have said that was actually also a very healing activity, and it becomes a little more communal when they want to share it. So we actually had a whole art show with stuff like that too, with that whole body of work. It was really cool. But yeah, so that's the only way I've found really to bring people in, or the one is like letting them sew, letting them deconstruct, or, this other version that I now have, this like paper version that is used. And to be really honest, like really frank, I'm going through a lot of stress in my life right now. And I just thought, you know what, I'm getting out those triangles. I'm going to do it myself because this has healed me in the past over something. And I trust that it's a pretty universal tool and I can come back to this thing.
That's amazing, Liberty. I wanted to say something about the deconstructing. I know that when I worked with you, you asked me if I wanted to deconstruct. And I personally couldn't do it with Alice's clothes. However, I think if it was my father's clothes, I'm not wishing my father an early grave or anything like that. Sorry, Dad. But if it were his, or, an adult friend or something like that, I think I would have enjoyed that part of it. But, and not enjoyed, I mean, you know what I mean. I would have found value from that part of it.
Yes.
But I couldn't do it to my child's clothes. I just couldn't do it. I was more than happy to have someone else do that. It's the reason I wanted it to become a quilt. I couldn't bring myself to really do anything with the clothes. So, but I love that you keep it open, because different people are going to be in different places. And maybe if I had waited 3 years, I would have found value in doing that. Maybe if I had done it 3 years early, I would have found value in doing it. So I think a lot of it is where you are at in the journey and who it is. I know I couldn't do it to my child's clothes, but I think I would have really found value if it was an adult loved one.
Right. Well, and every grief journey is so unique, right? So it's not like it can be put into a category, or, like there's not like a step you can do that's the right step. It's just, you just have to feel it out. And so what's perfect for one family is not the right thing for the other family. So it really is, it's a matter of knowing knowing yourself, knowing the place you're at, and being willing to say yes or no, like with some conviction,
Absolutely. I think Dr. A has a question.
Sorry if this sounds stupid. I did fail Art 101, but what do you mean by the deconstructing?
It's literally tearing the clothes apart. And so it is cutting out the waistbands of pants and cutting off the necklines and the collars and the buttons so that the fabric becomes like sewable, if that makes sense. Like it has to be flat for me to use it. And in that space, I need for it to be, a lot of times I actually have to fuse it to something else as well. A lot of times we wear t-shirts and knits, and those things are very stretchy. So they don't lend themselves to being sewn very well into a flat object. And so because of that, I have to put something that's like a fusible backing onto them, and that makes them lie flat and can be cut in different shapes. And so there's a couple reasons why that's hard in particular. One is just taking something from usable and from how it was used and putting it into a different state is difficult, because you're saying this is no more. So there's an aspect of that. And then the secondary aspect, which is really unexpected, is when you're fusing it to the thing that makes it workable, is all the smells come out. And because it's an ironing process. And I am sometimes sitting in the room with the smell of a person. And that's pretty real. Like, you wash your clothes and the smell of the person is still in the clothes, even after you've watched it. Like, that is very true when I'm quilting, and if I'm working with someone's clothes, I'm smelling that person for a couple weeks. So that can be pretty intense.
And can be healing. I have very few regrets in life. One regret that I do have is the day after Alice died, my house was absolutely full of people just started arriving. I mean, there were hundreds of people through my house that day. And on that day, I was ready to receive them, I guess. I mean, I was in total shock because we had no idea Alice was going to die. And some friend of mine wanted to be helpful and washed all of our clothes, which, was helpful, except for, a few weeks later when I was a little bit more on planet Earth, I realized I didn't have really anything that smelled like Alice anymore, which was heartbreaking. I did find a couple of blankets and I've, put those away and, but they lose their smell after a bit. So I love that part of what you're talking about, Liberty. It's really beautiful. Beth, did you have a question?
Actually, it's not really a question. I just wanted to say to Liberty that your work is so beautiful and it's so wonderful to create something that where you do take that heaviness and transform it into not just a thing of beauty, but something that is sort of a distillation of that person. It's just really wonderful. And I just had this amazing thought, when you were saying that how clothes throughout history kind of represent something of the personality and the sort of the value of a person. I had this speaking of woo-woo, I had this experience right after I had lost someone, not a child, but my stepmom. And I had this really amazing vision where I saw her and she was attempting to tell me that she was okay, but it wasn't verbal. It was through her clothing. She showed me without talking that, like, she had gotten dressed and she was wearing something really colorful that she liked. And that was her way of demonstrating something really about she was who she was and she was okay. And anyway, I just thank you for your work. It's really beautiful and very meaningful.
Thank you. That's such a beautiful story. I was like, with my mic off saying, wow, it's amazing. Like, that's incredible. It reminds me, that those textiles are so important. And one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that I had one customer that I just really adored, and she had lost her brother and while he was a teenager, and what they did was they took some of his letters and gave them to me, and we printed them onto fabric and were able to incorporate that too. Like, there's just some ways where we can find these unique things to do. Like, his handwritten letters were incorporated into the work. And
wow.
Yeah, it was really beautiful. And I actually printed it on velvet so that when they touched it, it was even more tactile than anything else on the quilt. And it was like those ways that we can hear, like, have them speak to us later on. It's incredible. And her mother has, that quilt now, and it's a beautiful thing to be able to see the words, to hear the words.
Wow, that's an amazing idea and a great idea for when you're working with someone who might be more verbal than visually driven. That's a really beautiful idea, and I broke out in head to toe chills when you said you did it in velvet. That's why you're the genius that you are. That is just a master stroke. Did anyone else have any questions for Liberty or myself, or any other ideas on how to create meaningful memorial gifts for somebody? Okay. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up, Liberty?
Gosh, I feel like I've been able to say everything. I'm so grateful just to have been here and to have this conversation with all of you.
Dr. A?
I just wanted to thank you, Liberty, for everything you do for anyone who's bereaved, and thank everybody for coming to the space, and thank you, Melissa, for the space. Some of this stuff is so foreign for coming from a family where if someone died, everybody just buys flowers, they're all at the funeral, and you never see them again. And so to think of, and they didn't talk about them when they were dead. I mean, it was basically nothing. They were dead, and that was the end. So to have these kind of chats and to hear what other people do, it's just really very moving and very beautiful. So thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad that you have found value in it, Dr. A. And I hope that you were able to glean some ideas of stuff that you could still do to this day, with whatever items you still have from those people, and transform them into something that's usable or beautiful, or that isn't sitting in a box in your closet. And if you have some of those items and you have questions for me, or I'm sure Liberty would be happy to answer questions, feel free to reach out to me, because I've heard so many memorial gift ideas through the years, but so many of them can be done at any point, even decades later, and which allows people a way to work through grief that maybe they didn't even realize was still there, because we've all been trained to just carry on with a smile and get on with it. But that's not always possible, and it's not really ideal, frankly. Liberty, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that sometimes well-meaning people will bring me in too early. And I think that is, if someone is not ready, I actually don't ever approach people. They'll be like, oh, you need to call so-and-so to, talk to them about it. And I don't call those people because I think you're
Same.
right. I'm not ever going to approach someone and suggest this. And well-meaning people will be like, you need to do this. Here's her number. Here's their thing. And I usually, I have rarely, maybe only twice, worked with people where it was within the same year as someone passing. And I don't even know, for most people, I don't know if it's healthy to even have me in before that. So I just want to encourage people that later sometimes is better. There's plenty of time to heal, and honoring someone in that space, just to not be too eager, but just to, I think encouraging people to save clothes is great. But introducing someone like me or someone who does work like I do too early can be difficult for people and painful.
Absolutely. I remember when Alice died, I had many offers of, oh, my friend's child died, and if you need to talk to someone who also had a child die, and these people mean well. I'm not denigrating these people at all, but I was flooded with offers like that. And I could barely talk at all. I could barely, that's not a euphemism. And if I did speak, I felt like I had to sleep for 5 hours. Beth was there. She's well aware. And Beth is also well aware that I normally have absolutely no problem talking, but I could not speak. I found it physically exhausting. And so I could barely talk to anyone, much less someone I didn't know. And also early in the journey, I don't know that it's helpful to talk to someone who's 10 years out. They're in such a different place. You are in such a different place 10 years down the road. And that can seem almost callous to someone who's fresh in it, where it happened 10 seconds ago, or, 12 hours ago. But so many well-meaning people offered that. And conversely, now that I'm 9 years out almost at the next month, I have many people say, oh, my friend lost a baby, or, lost a toddler. Will you please call them? And like Liberty said, it's just really not my place. And I remember how I felt, and I know I wasn't ready to talk to a stranger, whether we had this thing in common or not. And mostly I didn't want to have this thing in common with anyone. I didn't want it to have happened to me, and I sure as shit didn't want it to have happened to anybody else. So I didn't want to be in this club. That's why my podcast is called This Club Sucks. No one wants that club. That club, it's a miserable. There's no upside to that club. So it's a really great point you make. And also they tell you not to make any, giant changes in that first year, and transforming clothing and textiles might not seem like a big deal, but it is. I have yet to meet a bereaved parent that wasn't absolutely stymied by what to do with the clothes. On that note, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Dr. A, thank you so much. Thank you to Rachel and Beth for chiming in. Liberty, thank you so much for being here and just being such a beautiful friend and creating something for me that was truly life-changing, and for all the work that you do for so many people while processing your own trials and tribulations. And you're really just one of the people I admire most in this world, and I love you.
Oh, I love you too. Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone. So we're wrapping up today. Meaningful memorial gifts on still can't talk an hour later. Child loss chat to be recorded for my podcast, This Club Sucks. Support for grief parents after the lasagnas are long gone. Thank you so much for being here, everyone, and we'll be here next week.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information on the show or my other work, you can check out thisclubsucks.com or melissamariemonroe.com, or you can find me on Twitter at @MMeaning. May you experience some gentleness on your path today.